The woman didn't ask if the seat across from me was taken. She simply set the small blue box on my table, leaned close enough that I could smell rain on her coat, and whispered, "You'll need this tonight." Then she walked away, heels tapping like a countdown, leaving me frozen with my fork halfway to my mouth. If you love deep, emotional revenge stories, subscribe to Silent Revenge Story, share this video, and press the bell icon so you never miss what comes next. The restaurant was warm and loud, all clinking glasses and soft jazz, but a cold pressure settled in my chest as if someone had opened a window inside me. I stared at the box. It wasn't wrapped, just plain blue cardboard, the corners worn like it had been passed through too many hands. I didn't touch it at first. I told myself this was a mistake, that she'd confused me for someone else. But the way she said tonight made my stomach tighten with an old, familiar dread. I'd come here to escape that feeling. A simple dinner alone after another long day of swallowing small humiliations at work. Another evening of pretending I didn't hear the jokes, didn't notice the looks. I had ordered my usual, sat at my usual corner table, believing routine could protect me. The blue box shattered that illusion. People around me laughed. A couple at the next table argued softly over dessert. Somewhere, a waiter dropped a tray and cursed under his breath. Life went on, unaware that something inside me had begun to crack. I finally slid the box closer with one finger. It was heavier than it looked. My name wasn't on it. No note. Just the box, quiet and accusing. For a moment, I considered leaving it there, walking out, pretending none of this had happened. But pain has a way of making you curious, especially when it feels personal. I opened it just enough to see what was inside, then snapped it shut so fast my hands trembled. Whatever it was, it belonged to my past. A heat rushed to my face, followed by a deep sinking shame that made my ears ring. Memories I'd buried under years of forced smiles and polite silence clawed their way back. I felt suddenly exposed, like everyone in the restaurant could see straight through me, could see the weak spots I worked so hard to hide. My appetite vanished. The food in front of me looked Chinese letter, foreign, untouchable. I looked up, searching for the woman, but she was gone. It felt deliberate, like she delivered a wound and left me alone to bleed quietly in public. That was always how it happened, wasn't it? Pain never announced itself with drama. It arrived softly, sat beside you, and waited until you acknowledged it. I paid the bill without tasting a single bite and carried the blue box out into the night. The sky had darkened, the air thick with the promise of rain. As I walked to my car, every step felt heavier, as if the box was pulling me backward in time. I thought of all the times I'd kept my head down, told myself endurance was strength, silence was dignity. I thought of the things I'd lost by choosing not to fight. At home, I placed the box on my kitchen table and sat across from it, just as I had in the restaurant. My hands ached to open it fully, to confront whatever truth it held, but fear pressed me into the chair. Pain isn't just about hurt, it's about recognition. It's about realizing that someone knows exactly where you're vulnerable and has decided, for reasons you don't yet understand, to press there. The clock ticked louder than usual. Outside, rain finally began to fall, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. I understood then that the woman hadn't given me a choice. Tonight wasn't just another night. It was the beginning of something I could no longer avoid, a reckoning wrapped in a blue box, delivered under bright restaurant lights while the world looked away. And as the pain settled in, deep and steady, I knew this was only the first wound. I opened the blue box when the rain outside grew heavy enough to drown out my thoughts. Inside lay an old phone, my phone from years ago, the one I'd reported stolen after that disastrous company retreat. Beneath it was a folded envelope, thick with photographs. My breath caught as I slid them out, one by one, my fingers going numb. Every picture was a moment I had spent years pretending never happened. Me, drunker than I should have been, surrounded by colleagues who were supposed to be friends. Me, slumped in a chair, eyes unfocused, laughing at jokes made at my expense. Me, finally asleep, unconscious. while someone posed beside me grinning, their thumb raised in mock victory. I felt sick, not because I didn't remember these moments, but because I remembered them too well. My phone buzzed. A notification from the company group chat lit up the screen of my current phone, then another, and another. I didn't need to open them to know. Somehow, impossibly, the past had clawed its way into the present. When I finally looked, my worst fear confirmed itself. Someone had uploaded the photos. All of them. No warning, no explanation. Just a caption that made my chest tight. Some people never change. Thought this deserved a throwback. The chat exploded. Laughing emojis. Shocked reactions. Comments that pretended to be jokes but cut deeper than honesty ever could. My name appeared again and again, tagged, highlighted, dragged into the open. People I worked with every day, people who shook my hand, asked about my weekend, trusted me with projects, were now spectators to my humiliation. I wanted to disappear. I imagined them scrolling through the images, zooming in, whispering to each other the next morning. I imagined the looks I'd get when I walked into the office, the forced smiles, the thinly veiled curiosity. Shame burned so hot it felt like anger, but it had nowhere to go. Then came the call from my manager. His voice was careful, professional, sharpened with disappointment. He talked about company image and appropriate behavior, about how these photos raised questions. Questions about my judgment, my reliability, my worth. I listened in silence, staring at the blue box on my table like it was the mouth of a trap. By morning, it was worse. Someone had shared the images beyond the company chat. I saw them posted anonymously on a local forum, then cropped and reposted elsewhere. Strangers commented freely, cruelly, dissecting a version of me frozen in my worst moment. They didn't know my name, but that almost made it worse. To them, I was just entertainment. At work, the humiliation became physical. Conversations stopped when I entered a room. Laughter dipped, then resumed too loudly. During a meeting, a coworker made a joke about watching ourselves at parties, and a few people glanced at me before looking away. No one defended me. No one asked if I was okay. Public humiliation doesn't need shouting. It thrives on shared silence. I locked myself in a bathroom stall and pressed my forehead against the cold metal divider. Breathing shallowly, counting the seconds until I could leave without drawing more attention. My reflection in the mirror looked smaller somehow, like the version of me in those photos had swallowed the present whole. That evening, another message arrived, this one from an unknown number. "You see why you needed the box," it read. "This is only what they let you see." My hands shook as I typed back, demanding to know who they were, what they wanted. The reply came quickly. "Justice," it said, "but first you have to feel it the way I did." I understood then that this wasn't random cruelty. It was curated. Someone had planned this with precision, timing the release so it would hurt the most, at work, in public, where my reputation mattered. They wanted me exposed, stripped of dignity, forced to stand helpless while others decided who I was. That night, as I lay awake replaying every laugh, every look, every comment, I realized the humiliation wasn't just about the photos. It was about control. Someone had taken my worst memory and used it to remind me how easily my life could be overturned. And in that realization, buried beneath the shame, a dangerous awareness began to form. The noise faded faster than I expected. By the third day, the group chats went quiet, the anonymous posts slowed, and the whispers at work softened into something more insidious: normalcy. Not forgiveness, not understanding, just silence, thick and suffocating, like a room after a scream where no one mentions what was broken. My manager sent a brief email saying we revisit expectations later. HR scheduled a meeting, then postponed it without explanation. Coworkers stopped tagging me in conversations altogether. I was still there, still doing my job, but I had become invisible in the most public way possible. Silence, I learned, is humiliation that pretends to be mercy. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I didn't ask who had leaked the photos or why. Every instinct told me to shout the truth, that I had been taken advantage of, that those pictures were not jokes but evidence of something ugly. But I knew how those conversations went. People listened just long enough to decide how uncomfortable they felt, then quietly backed away. Silence felt safer, so I accepted it. The unknown number didn't text again. Days passed. Nights stretched long and restless. The blue box stayed on my kitchen table like a witness I refused to face. I powered on the old phone once just to see if it still worked. It did. Messages loaded slowly, years old, fragments of a life I thought I'd outgrown. One draft message, never sent, sat at the top. An apology, not written by me. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about what happened at that retreat. It was about what happened after. The way the company closed ranks. The way complaints were lost. The way I'd been advised to take some time while others were promoted. I had convinced myself silence was strength because admitting the truth meant admitting how alone I was. At work, projects I used to lead were reassigned without discussion. In meetings, my ideas were ignored until someone else repeated them. No one mocked me anymore. They didn't have to. Silence did the work for them, erasing me inch by inch. One evening, as I left the office late, I noticed someone waiting by my car. A woman stood under the streetlight, her face half-shadowed, posture calm. It was her, the woman from the restaurant. She didn't smile. "They're done watching," she said quietly, as if continuing a conversation we'd never finished. "Now they're waiting for you to disappear." I asked her why she did it, why she'd tear open something I'd worked so hard to seal shut. "Because you survived it," she replied, "and they counted on that." She told me her name, told me her story, different details, same ending. A night blamed on her choices, evidence dismissed. Silence recommended for everyone's comfort but hers. She had kept copies of everything because no one else would. The blue box wasn't a gift, it was a mirror. "They think silence means the story is over," she said. "It's not. It's just the pause before the balance shifts." I wanted to ask what she expected from me, but she shook her head. "Nothing yet. Just don't fill the silence. Let them get comfortable." That night I stopped trying to explain myself, even in my own head. I stopped drafting emails I'd never send. I watched. I listened. I learned who avoided my eyes and who pretended nothing had changed. Silence gave me clarity. It showed me where the power really sat and how fragile it was when exposed to light. Weeks passed. The humiliation cooled into something harder, denser, resolve. I realized then that silence wasn't surrender. It was cover, and beneath it something was moving, patient and deliberate. When my phone buzzed again with a message from her, it wasn't a warning. It was a signal. The message contained only an address and a time. No explanation, no instructions, just certainty. I didn't hesitate. Silence had taught me enough to recognize momentum when it appeared. The address led to a modest office building on the edge of downtown, the kind people pass without noticing. Inside, the lights were low and the air smelled faintly of coffee and paper. She was waiting, seated at a table scattered with folders, laptops, and hard drives. Others were there too, 3 women and 1 man, none of them looking angry, none of them looking afraid. They looked prepared. "This is where it changes," she said, finally smiling, but there was no warmth in it. "For you and for them." They showed me what silence had hidden. Records, timelines, patterns. My photos weren't an isolated incident. They were part of a larger archive of moments captured, shared, and weaponized by the same small circle of people, managers, contractors, executives, who treated humiliation like a private currency. The retreat wasn't a mistake. It was a hunting ground. My role in their story had always been passive, a lesson, a warning, someone they could point to and say, "See what happens when you don't play along." That illusion shattered as I watched the evidence stack up, neat and undeniable, complaints buried, transfers timed conveniently, promotions granted to the same names again and again. "They think power is loud," she said. "It's not, It's quiet, it's paperwork, it's who signs what and who never has to. For the first time since the restaurant, the tightness in my chest eased. Not because the past hurt less, but because it finally made sense. I hadn't failed by staying silent. I'd survived long enough to become useful to myself. They didn't ask me to be brave. They asked me to be precise. My old phone wasn't just proof, it was a key. Metadata, timestamps, connections that tied their private jokes to public decisions. The blue box had been the opening move. Everything since had been about positioning. At work, I noticed the shift before anyone else did. A senior manager grew suddenly cautious in meetings. HR rescheduled my postponed conversation with an unfamiliar urgency. Emails arrived carefully worded, almost respectful. Silence was no longer aimed at erasing me. It was aimed at avoiding mistakes. The woman, my ally now, explained the timing. Complaints would be filed together, not separately. Press inquiries prepared but not released. Legal filings drafted and held. The goal wasn't revenge yet. It was leverage. I walked through the office differently, not taller, not louder, just steadier. When someone avoided my eyes, I let them. When someone overcompensated with friendliness, I took note. Power had shifted because I no longer needed their approval to exist. Then came the first crack. An internal memo leaked carefully, anonymously, about ongoing reviews. Names weren't mentioned, but everyone knew. The people who once laughed now whispered with a different edge. Fear, I realized, sounded remarkably like respect when stripped of authority. One evening, my manager called me into his office. He spoke about growth, about fresh starts, about how the company valued resilience. I listened the same way I always had, but this time I understood the subtext. He was negotiating without knowing it. When I left, I sent a single message to the group waiting downtown. They've noticed. The reply came instantly. Good, next comes the noise. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. Not because the danger had passed, but because it had direction. Power isn't taken in a moment. It's transferred through awareness, one realization at a time. And now they were aware that the story they thought was buried had learned how to speak. The pause was over. The noise began on a Monday morning, sharp and unavoidable. It didn't come from us directly. That was the brilliance of it. An investigative journalist published a piece about corporate retreats and the quiet culture of coercion, naming no victims at first, only patterns. The article spread fast, shared by people who recognized the outlines even if they didn't yet see the faces. By noon, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Colleagues texted carefully worded questions. A few offered sudden, performative support. Management sent an all-staff email about values and zero tolerance, the kind of message designed to look proactive while saying nothing. But the ground had shifted. Silence was no longer possible. At exactly 2:00 p.m., the names were released. Not by us, not impulsively, but through sworn statements filed publicly and simultaneously. The same men who'd once laughed in my photos were now listed in legal documents, their titles spelled out in cold, formal language. The shock wasn't just exposure, it was timing. Contracts were frozen. Deals paused. Board members demanded answers before the end of the day. I watched it unfold from my desk, calm in a way that surprised me. For years, I had imagined revenge as something loud, emotional, satisfying in the moment. This was different. This was surgical. Their power collapsed not because they were shouted down, but because the systems that protected them suddenly couldn't afford to. One of them tried to call me. I didn't answer. Another sent an email that read like an apology until you noticed it never actually said sorry. I forwarded it, unread, to the address I'd been given weeks ago. By evening, news outlets had picked up the story. Photos I'd once been humiliated by were now evidence, cropped, contextualized, stripped of mockery. The narrative flipped so fast it was dizzying. What had been a joke became a pattern. What had been one bad night became a documented method. At work, people avoided me again, but this time it was different. No pity, no curiosity, just the uncomfortable awareness that I was no longer safe to dismiss. Shock does that. It reorders hierarchies without asking permission. The woman from the restaurant stood beside me outside the building as reporters gathered across the street. She didn't look triumphant. She looked relieved. "They never thought anyone would connect the dots," she said. "They counted on isolation." Inside, HR announced administrative leave for multiple executives. Security escorted one of them out while employees watched in stunned silence. The same hallway where I'd once shrunk now felt strangely small, as if it couldn't contain what was happening. That night my face appeared briefly on the news, not as a spectacle but as a source. Anonymous, steady, undeniable. The shock wasn't in what I said. It was in the fact that I said it at all. Messages poured in from people I'd never met. Some thanked me. Some shared fragments of their own stories. The scale of it settled over me slowly. This wasn't just revenge, it was disruption. When the phone finally went quiet, I thought about the blue box, about how this had started not with anger but with pain delivered quietly at a restaurant table. Revenge, I realized, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits until the moment when the truth will hurt the most. As I turned off the lights, one last message arrived from her. "Tomorrow they'll try to make it right. That's when we decide what justice looks like." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The shock had done its work. Now came the part that would last, the reckoning. The morning after the story broke, the city felt quieter, as if everyone was listening for something to fall. I arrived at the office to find my access temporarily suspended, not as punishment but as procedure. That distinction mattered more than I expected. Procedures exist to restore order. Justice exists to change it. By midday, the company released a formal statement. This one was different. It acknowledged harm. It named failures. It promised cooperation. Lawyers had clearly taken over, sanding down every sentence until it could survive scrutiny. But beneath the polish was fear. Not of me, but of what transparency might uncover next. I met the woman and the others downtown again in the same modest office. The table was clearer now, fewer folders, fewer secrets. What remained was choice. Settlements were being offered, quiet, generous, conditional. Money in exchange for silence, the same currency they'd always used. "This is where it usually ends," she said. "Everyone gets tired, everyone wants peace." I thought about the version of myself in those photos, frozen and powerless. I thought about the people who'd laughed and the ones who'd looked away. Peace built on forgetting suddenly felt too small. We countered, not with demands for more money but with terms that couldn't be buried. Mandatory policy changes, independent oversight, public acknowledgement without non-disclosure, training led by people who'd lived the consequences, not just studied them. They resisted. Of course they did. Justice is expensive when you've never budgeted for it, but the leverage held. Investors asked questions. Partners hesitated. The cost of refusing became higher than the cost of agreeing. Weeks later, the agreement was signed. It wasn't perfect. Justice rarely is, but it was real. Names were removed from leadership. Structures changed. A fund was established for future claims protected from internal interference. Silence was no longer the default option. On my last day before returning under a new team, I walked through the office one final time. People met my eyes now. Some nodded, some looked away. Both felt earned. That evening I went back to the restaurant. Same corner table, same soft jazz. I placed the blue box on the table between me and the empty chair across from me, then pushed it aside. It had done its job. She arrived late, smiling this time genuinely. We didn't talk about revenge. We talked about ordinary things, work, weather, plans that extended beyond survival. Justice doesn't erase the past, but it gives the future room to breathe. As we stood to leave, she paused. "You know," she said, "they'll remember you as the person who changed things." I shook my head. They'll remember the consequences. Outside, the night air was cool, steady. For the first time in a long while, I felt present in my own life, not defined by pain, not by humiliation, not even by revenge, just grounded. The blue box stayed behind on the table, unnoticed by the next guest who sat there. Some tools are only meant to be used once. The blue box remained on the table like a quiet witness, its edges softened by handling, its purpose fulfilled. I left the restaurant that night feeling lighter, though my muscles ached from tension I hadn't realized I'd carried for months. The air smelled of wet pavement, neon reflections from streetlights dancing on puddles, and every step felt deliberate, grounded. It wasn't triumph in the dramatic sense. It was a subtle, profound relief. Pain had been confronted. Humiliation had been endured. Silence had become a strategy. Power had shifted. Shock had been delivered. And now moral justice, real, lasting, structured justice, had been achieved. I thought about the journey that had led here. The initial dread when I saw the box, the way my stomach had turned to ice, the sleepless nights haunted by memories I had tried to bury. Pain is a strange teacher. It burns, but it also reveals. It shows you what matters, what you fear losing, and how far you'll go to reclaim yourself. Public humiliation, which had once seemed unbearable, became a lens through which I could see the fragility of those who thought themselves untouchable. Silence, once suffocating, had become my ally, allowing me to gather clarity, to map the landscape of deceit and manipulation without acting rashly. Now, standing on the quiet street, I understood the profound weight of consequence. The people who had orchestrated my suffering were still human, flawed, greedy, short-sighted, but they were accountable. Systems they'd abused were being corrected. Policies they had ignored were being rewritten. What they once used to mock and control had turned into instruments of accountability. That was justice, not vengeance, not spectacle, but restoration of balance. The city around me carried on, unaware of the drama that had unfolded behind closed doors. Passers-by hurried along sidewalks, umbrellas bobbing through the rain. Street vendors shouted over the drizzle, offering snacks and warmth. Traffic lights changed with predictable rhythm. Life had returned to normal, but for me, everything had changed. I had emerged not only intact but empowered, aware of the tools I possessed and the leverage I had been given. I returned home and sat at my kitchen table. The blue box had followed me from a restaurant table across nights of uncertainty and fear into the heart of my life. And yet now it felt ordinary. Its edges no longer pressed against the raw nerve of anxiety. It had fulfilled its role, delivered its message, and been acknowledged. I traced the corners with my fingers once, then left it in its place. The significance wasn't in the object, but in what it had catalyzed. I reflected on the woman who had delivered it, the quiet architect of a reckoning I could never have orchestrated alone. She had known the weight of silence, the value of patience, the timing of impact. I owed her more than gratitude. I owed her recognition that not all victories roar. Some arrive quietly, through calculated precision, through the subtle realignment of power and consequence. As I prepared for bed, I felt an unexpected peace. The memories of humiliation no longer held me captive. They had been transformed into lessons of resilience. I had learned that justice does not always come in dramatic gestures. It often arrives in measured, deliberate moves that leave no doubt and change the landscape for the better. I drifted to sleep with the rain tapping gently against the window, the world continuing its rhythm outside, while inside I felt finally aligned, finally free. The next morning life continued, but I knew I had altered its course, not by force but by endurance, insight, and careful strategy. The blue box would remain a quiet reminder that the right action at the right moment could transform pain into power, humiliation into awareness, and silence into a platform for justice. It was a lesson etched not in loud triumph, but in lasting consequence, a moral justice that would ripple far beyond a single night, beyond a single restaurant, beyond a single life.